Welcome to Margaret. She's no stranger to UX, or excuse me, to MX, and this will be her third appearance. She's always rated one of our best speakers, so it feels almost a failure on our part to not invite you back. Like having John, what's his name, in all the Pixar movies, who plays Norm on
Cliff.
Cheers. Cliff on Cheers, yeah. She's always bringing the freshest ideas and approaches and an ability to deliver them in a really matter-of-fact packaging that people really enjoy. So you've worked for internet pioneers like Tripod, sort of the more staid publishers and banks of the world, but yet wherever she goes, she leaves a wake of UX teams and other people in love with her leadership style. So I've invited her to do this Q&A session together with me, so we can kind of get a sense of what's she thinking, what has she been experiencing lately, and what seems to really help get great experiences out in the world. So today she's leading, or previously, when we talked to her, she was leading search and consumer products and UX at Google. So my question for you now is, what's up?
Well, thanks for having me. It's always fun to be here. I always feel like this is like, my people.
Yeah.
Going to conferences for years and all about, interesting stuff around execution. And I remember the first time I came to MX and I was like, my people.
I found you.
That's exactly right. So it's always good to be here. Like Brandon said, I spent a couple of years managing the user experience team for search and consumer at Google, and a little over a year ago I switched over to YouTube, which is owned by Google, but is is a horse of a different color, as someone once said. And it's been a really amazing year. YouTube is obviously a phenomenally successful product from a number of perspectives, and it's also kind of a social phenomenon. So, it's coming up on its 5th anniversary. It's actually, I think this month is the 5th anniversary of the creation of the site. And it's one of those products where, and I can say this because I had nothing to do with creating it, so it's always nice to come in and just be like, you can brag on the product because, you're not kind of complimenting yourself. It's kind of hard to remember what it was like before it existed, which is always a good sign.
Yeah.
What did we do before we could access this enormous corpus of videos from all over the world? And so the scale and of the operation of this thing is kind of crazy. Everybody knows that it's like the leading online video destination, which is kind of obvious. It's also the second largest search engine, which means that the only place people go to more to search is Google, which is kind of
surprising.
Really interesting in terms of people's changing attitudes towards where do I get answers from, as well as the importance of video in terms of people's experiences day to day. In fact, we find interestingly enough, sometimes users just going to YouTube first to get the answer to a question. And a part of this I feel like is an evolving sense of when I was young, text was the thing that gave you answers. It was kind of the authority. But I think that a lot more people now are kind of growing up in a world where different types of media may be better than text to provide an answer. So that I think is really interesting from the way things are changing. I think some of the other things that are kind of crazy is we're seeing over 1 billion views a day on the site. There's not that many things that happen in the world 1 billion times a day. I mean, it's kind of a crazy statistic. It's more views than all 3 networks get, major U.S. networks get in a day. So the scale of the viewership is pretty incredible. The other statistic that's kind of crazy is it's over 20 hours of video uploaded every minute to the site, which is a stat that's hard to get your head around, just the volume of stuff that's being created. But we produce, or there's more content uploaded to YouTube every 60 days than the 3 major networks produced in the last 60 years. So it's it's an insane amount of content, and there's all kinds of interesting challenges around making the video discoverable and providing a context where all this stuff can be consumed in an interesting way. So the interesting thing for me as a UX manager is all of this success with user experience that I think we all knew internally in the organization had a lot of areas where it could be even better than it was. And so, the opportunity to actually improve the user experience and see an even faster rate of growth is clearly a possibility. So that's really exciting. It's not like you're coming to a product where all of the design work is kind of, done and, the fit and finish is there. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting rough edges around YouTube as a product. And so we're having a lot of fun saying, wow, like, how much better could it be, with the polish and the different types of work that we've been doing over the past year.
Nice. So, okay, you've got massive scale, massive user contribution going on. So, what have been the challenges in the move from sort of a Google mindset to a YouTube mindset?
Well, oh, sorry, I forgot about these other. I'll just flash through these real quick. They're not as interesting as the other ones, but the interesting thing about a product like YouTube or any like really big user-generated content type platform is I often use the analogy that it's like trying to change the saddle on a bucking bronco while you're riding it. It's just always growing and going in all these different directions and different types of people using it for different purposes. We're in the process of redesigning different parts of the site, and so the move has been interesting from a number of perspectives in terms of figuring out getting some context around what the internal culture is, what the external culture is, what this community is about, what they care most about, and then figuring out how to kind of change the right things in the right direction and leave the things that are working alone. There's, as I said, we knew internally that there was a lot of cleanup that could go on the site, which is what we're really focused on right now. Stripping a lot of things away that were interesting experiments, but just didn't necessarily create a lot of value, and then figuring out, the things that are working exceptionally well and refining those and giving them much more prominence. I think in terms of the move organizationally, it's always tricky to move into a new context because, here's like the move, right? You got all this stuff that you're carrying with you, but you're also coming into a new context, like I said, that has, cultural norms and expectations around how things are done. Ways that people have of working that may be working well, but as a manager or a leader you may be unfamiliar with. It doesn't mean that you're right and they're wrong. So it really speaks to the need for kind of adaptive leadership. I often joke with my team that the person and the manager that they think I am is very different than the person that I was at Google. I'm a very, very different persona. And it's because the needs of what YouTube needs from UX leadership is very different from Google. There's a need to provide kind of a framework and some rigor around the design work that already existed at Google, right? Yeah. There's a very strong sense of this is what our UI looks like. Very strong processes in place to review UI before it goes out into production. And so that wasn't the need. The need there was more, how can we remove obstacles and roadblocks from good work going out into production? And at YouTube, it was more, what do we want this thing to evolve into over the next 5 years? And can we articulate that in a way that feels kind of culturally appropriate, but keeps us moving forward?
So how did your persona change then as a leader?
I sometimes joke that I think back when I was at Google and I was nice Margaret, and I was just all about helping people get their work out, and now sometimes I'm mean Margaret, which is not necessarily really being mean, but having a lot of involvement in the day-to-day, not trying to get into micromanagement, but that delicate space of having strong standards in place, and the adjustment to a move into that space of rigor is like you're always like dancing around the line of micromanagement. So that's a really, really interesting kind of phase that we have gone through over the past year, and I think that it's really evolved into a place where the team is very empowered and I think more influential than they ever have been. Yeah. So that's been definitely a really interesting process.
Yeah. So real quick, what kind of team did you inherit? Like just number of folks and any characterization?
Yeah. there's a really strong role for design always at YouTube. So one of the founders, Chad Hurley, is a designer. So, you know, my advice to anybody looking for work is always look for a place where the CEO has a design background. I mean, it's, you know, it's really in the DNA of the company to care about user experience at a very fundamental level. So, you know, the team that was there was incredibly, and is incredibly passionate about the product. YouTube is not a product that people feel neutrally about. You know, the people who work at that company are extremely passionate about free speech and empowering the democratization of media. So you don't have a distant arm's length relationship from the product. But that also means that there's a lot of really strongly held opinions that need to be facilitated. And as far as the UX function is concerned, I think one of the interesting things that we have been managing through over the course of the year is because, you know, Lane was talking about agile development, which we aren't a classic agile shop, but we're very, very fast moving. We do weekly pushes where we're constantly pushing new stuff out. And, you know, I think that what the team needed was kind of the time and the space and the support to think a little bit more long-term, as well as doing small, rapid, iterative cycles, to get out of the rut of just keeping up with the stuff that was being thrown at them. And so that has really been the process that we've gone through over the past year. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the brand, the internal brand of the UX team and the UX people. How have you helped increase the influence of your team within YouTube?
Well, you know, it's kind of been an interesting process. I'm going to skip over because we kind of, let's see, here we go. So we've gone through a lot of interesting changes around this issue. I mean, you know, I think we all know that demanding influence and authority rarely provides those things to you. Actually, it was funny because I couldn't figure out whether the UX people were the people on top or the people getting, you know, in this picture, but it's probably varies. But I think that, you know, one of the big issues for us, again, in a fast-moving shop, was the need to understand that we could never position ourselves as like, we're a strategy group. We're just going to give you the vision because that's what's really valuable. And if we don't have the vision, we don't know where we're headed. All those things are true. But the fact is each organization, and I find this to be one of the interesting things about moving around, there's always a currency within an organization, right? So at Google, that currency was data and having the technical chops to really be right in there in the mix with the engineers and kind of go toe-to-toe when it gets to design decision making. And the people who are really successful in that group are the people who love working with engineers and are technical enough to kind of push back when necessary. And that's the currency, right? At YouTube, it's implementing and executing good design really quickly. That is the most important thing that people need to provide. And if you kind of don't understand what the organizational currency is, your chance of really being influential is really diminished. And so what we've done over time is really move to a place where, you know, we are doing the small fixes and cleanups and new feature releases all the time, but the successful folks within the organization are able to manage two concurrent flows. Right? There's the small iterative stuff, and then right at the same time, the longer term, more kind of vision work, the strategy work that's being done. And I've found it within the organization that you can position yourself really effectively as just being an expert in execution, but it would be a very difficult organization to position yourself as strategy only. Right? Because what you don't then have is the currency with the engineers to also be a person who can help with what really matters to them, which is constantly pushing great stuff out. And so that has really been, I think, one of the most important kind of influencing things. I think the other thing that has been really important is changing the organizational model for UX within the company. Traditionally, the product management engineering organizations that we partner with have been organized around these small, fast-moving teams. And the way that structure is organized is sometimes just the way that things have been done in the past, or maybe there's engineering or technical reasons, you know, they're tying into different systems. And we've really switched to organizing around related experiences, right? So we don't necessarily line up neatly with engineering and product management, which sometimes, is kind of frustrating to them because they may have 2 or 3 designers to deal with instead of 1. But we know that if we aren't thinking holistically and in a related way around the experience, things will fall apart and things get designed in silos. So, and interestingly enough, in a couple of areas, we've actually made those changes, and then engineering and product management have ended up kind of following suit in a couple of ways, where say, oh, you know what, that actually does make sense that the ads UI within the player is done by the same group of people that design the player. Which sounds really obvious, probably to most people here, but they draw on completely different back-end systems, right? And organizationally, from totally different parts of the company. But from our perspective, we want the user to experience that as a really tight, cohesive experience. And so now we actually have some of that stuff being done within the consumer engineering and product management team, so it's kind of following suit. So that's been interesting to see too.
Nice, nice. So I think, first of all, it's really interesting just to think about what is the currency within your organization, and have you helped your teams actually recognize that that's what matters when they're interacting with the rest of the group. But you talked a little bit about that parallel track of making all the little d small changes and then sort of the big D kind of strategy that you're slowly working towards. So what do you mean when you say product strategy?
I think, in the context of YouTube, I do think it differs organization to organization. Again, at Tripod, when it was a startup, product strategy was like, I hope we have enough money to pay everybody tomorrow. In every context, it can be different. The time horizon that you have. Again, at Google, there's a very strong understanding of what product strategy is within search. At YouTube, because we were kind of about short cycles, there wasn't necessarily a longer term that helped us understand kind of what I refer to as our North Star. The point is not to actually get to that destination, but to have it be in the general right vicinity so that the short releases that we're doing are driving towards something that we're all kind of bought into. And when I first moved over to YouTube, the executive team basically said, Margaret, you need to help us figure out what YouTube user experience is going to be in a year. And it was interesting because when I kind of unpacked that request, there were a lot of sub-requests inside it. Like, what is the product experience going to be? What does the user experience framework need to be to support all of the stuff that we do for consumers and advertisers and content producers? What does the visual design language of the site need to evolve into to support that product strategy and those design principles? And so, we've had a process over the past year of, kind of coming up with some of those issues. And I think, how to get to it also varies from organization to organization. It's, for us, it doesn't look like these. There's, I wouldn't say there's an, allergy is probably too strong of a word, but in fast-moving organizations, talking too much about process is like your first-class ticket to not being a part of what happens, right? And so we all know that the process needs to happen, but for most people, the process isn't nearly as interesting as the outcome. And I think Peter was talking about this earlier today. I think user experience people are way more interested in their process than most people who work with us. And so, for us, it's, it was about having a lot of internal conversations about what mattered to people, why they loved working at YouTube, and what they really thought was important about what YouTube was doing in the world. So getting at some of the mission-driven aspects of what we're doing, talking to external users, and doing those same types of surveys, and then comparing the internal and external attitudes so that we could understand how our picture of ourselves was differing from what was going on outside. Certainly doing, some competitive analysis and some interesting concept work around, where the product experience could go in the long run. And then from a visual design perspective, doing, some pretty interesting divergent design exercises to say, here's a bunch of different directions it could go in, based on what we've decided is true for us and our company and our brand, what's the right direction? And this redesign that we've been working on is the kind of, coming to fruition of all this work, where you see the Chrome and the visual design of the site receding a lot more than it used to, because what matters on YouTube is video. We kind of got away from that, ironically, right? It's like, it's about a best-of-class watching experience and the best possible discovery experience. You know, it should just be so obvious, like all of these great new videos that we're putting in front of you to watch all the time. And so, you know, that was kind of how we approached the vision process within this particular context.
Yeah. So, take me a little. Go ahead.
Well, actually, just one more thing. I mean, I think, you know, for us, and Lane was talking about this as well, YouTube is a very human-driven product, right? So it's fundamentally built by people for other people, right? We are a platform and a conduit for all of that. And so the strategy for us was, you know, what do we need to do to get out of the way of all these filmmakers and musicians and political protesters and educators and people who just want to share videos of their kids with their family? Like, you know, and I'm really fascinated by this. I mean, it's really interesting and worthwhile to design products that are meant for a very specific purpose and a very specific audience, but I'm personally really interested in designing open systems that try to leave that last chapter unwritten, because I find that humans, like at massive scale, find much more inventive uses for things than a small group of people might be able to anticipate. And the fact is that most really amazing, innovative things that have gone on in technology, they didn't end up being successful because of the original intent that the founders or creators had. And that's true of you know, Twitter, of Google. I mean, Twitter started as a bike messenger service. That's not what's made it famous today. Google as a search engine, you know, and Larry Page has told this story, you know, it started as like, you know, a small piece of a web annotations project that they were working on at Stanford. And then all of a sudden they realized, hey, you know, this PageRank thing it was really, really interesting, right? It was kind of, you know, to the side, a side project. And so I think having that humility to understand that, you know, you need to be open to directions that lots of people take your product in. And also at some point, and this is where we're at now, which is like, we're in service of other people. You know, we're just trying to create the cleanest, best, most immersive experience and allow that container to hold, you know, all of the experiences of humankind, basically.
Wow, so that got really big picture. I'm wondering if you could take us a little bit more mechanically, like you were telling us, you know, about creating that vision, what are all the small things to get there, but how did you form a product strategy for YouTube, and how are you working to still do that?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, again, taking a very collaborative, interdisciplinary approach within the company, where the people involved in that process spanned every part of the organization, and figuring out, you know, where is the business going from a business model point of view, and how can that align with what is most important to our content creators, who are critically important to us, to content viewers. I mean, the thing that makes YouTube really interesting is it's a very complicated ecosystem. And I think the reason that we're having success on the strategy side is we're really looking at it at a systems level right now. I mean, again, you know, with fast-moving shops tend to be kind of very feature-driven, but if you're not understanding, you know, you do this thing over here and it actually impacts something over here, this is where the strategy is really coming in, is saying, here's how the entire ecosystem functions. You know, here is what this team that's moving very fast needs to be aware of when they're introducing this change to over here. And so the process of doing that had to do with, you know, articulating, you know, what were the most important experiences that we needed to prioritize, what were secondary and tertiary, and along those different user groups as well. So how do we balance and prioritize the needs of content creators against content viewers, which is a really interesting thing. Advertisers, obviously, is a third really important market. And then, you know, we had stakeholder interviews up front. We then had presentations that we did to the company as a whole. We're very, very open with all these materials, always sharing with the entire staff all of the materials as we went along, posting a lot of stuff on the walls. And then online as well, because we have other offices around the world in Tokyo and Zurich and all over the place, making sure that those teams weren't left out, doing a roadshow to share those ideas, and then really encouraging people to take some of these nascent concepts and to just build stuff out, build demos, you know, interesting ideas around collaborative viewing, you know, and now we've got like all kinds of interesting projects going on. And so really it's about putting inspiration material in front of people and engineers, and just letting them go off and see what they can do with it. But it's also about, again, having that high-level framework that makes sense of all of that rapid activity that's going on. And I think that was, you know, something that was new for the company and has really helped us at the end of the day move faster in better directions. Because, you know, from my perspective, UX frameworks, style guides, if they're poorly implemented and communicated, they feel like a set of rules and kind of a stick to beat people with. But in reality, what I'm really interested in is communicating boundaries so that people can knowingly break the rules, right? I'm not actually interested in maintaining all the rules, but I am interested in letting people know, here's the line, and just know when you're crossing over it so you can do it knowingly in smart ways and say, you know what? I'm going to break this convention because I think there's some really interesting space we haven't explored before. And that has really resonated with the engineers, right? This is about 80% of the time, we don't want to invent new UI. We want to know what the standard is so we can just get it out there fast. But sometimes we really do want to go off the rails, and that's good too.
Yeah, nice. You talked about in getting to that vision, it takes lots of steps, maybe lots of releases. You've had a major upgrade of the player, which went, from what I can tell, really, really well, so congratulations. And this is one of those things that, thinking back to Heidi's presentation, is something that is core to someone's life, and they maybe not be able to imagine living without, so you went and changed it. So how do you go about managing change and dealing with that?
This is one of my favorite topics because anytime you get involved in user-generated content, there's a really interesting dynamic because the users can very legitimately claim partial ownership to the site, right? It's their content. And obviously, we're a big part of giving them that platform. But the fact is, you know, they care a lot about it. A lot of people have their livelihoods wrapped up in it. You know, so these are not small issues. You know, we all know that users hate change, even when it's in their best interest, right? So, the team has practiced what I would consider to be a lot of transparency around what's going on with the community, which in a site like YouTube is really critical. Again, you know, we're dealing with humans here, and virtual relationships, whether it's between like a site and user experience team and the community or whatever, is no different than the way things work in real life, right? So if you have people in your life or people that you work with and you move things around, it's upsetting. It's a lot less upsetting when people know that it's going to happen, right? So, and when they're provided the rationale for design decisions. And when you explain to them, this was a matter of data, helping us understand the right decision. And here are some things that were more subjective that we had to make a decision on based on where we see the company going. And so, you know, if you look on the YouTube blog, there's a whole series of blog posts that we've done helping them to understand that change is coming so that hopefully a lot of them will understand that they just won't wake up and find it someday. Now granted, it's really, you know, the more engaged users where that's going to be true, but those tend to be the most vocal. So helping them to understand what's going on is really important. Sharing data with them, right? So one of the examples I'll give is, you know, we're experimenting with changing from our 5-star rating system to binary up-down model. Because in particular in short-form video, do you really need stars 1 through 4, or certainly 2, 3, 4, the data points to no. So, right, the chart of engagement is basically, boom, like all the ratings pretty much are 5-star. And so we released that chart, and we just put it on the blog and said, hey, look at this, what do you guys think? It looks like none of you are using stars 1 through 4. And the community responded saying, yeah, you guys are idiots. Why do you have this overly complicated system? And we're like, I don't know, maybe we should try something different. And interestingly enough, it started a whole thread across the internet about whether 5-star rating systems worked at all, you know? And then of course they do for things that involve a much greater customer investment, like paying for a dinner at a restaurant or seeing a movie, where you want to know more than up or down, right? So it was a really interesting user experience thing that evolved from that. But what's interesting about that is we're transparent, we shared the information. I think a fair number of people are prepared for this change to come along, and yet when we release it, we'll still get an enormous amount of backlash. But at the same time, as a team, you can prepare customers for change as much as you want, but that backlash is still going to happen. And so it's also about building that callus up to separate what is emotional response from legitimate bad experience. And the fact is in the experiments that we're running, we are seeing a significant increase in ratings from the new design, right? And so it is upsetting, the change of version is real, but we actually see from people's behavior that the product is working better for them. They're actually more engaged and giving a better quality signal to us about what they like and what they don't like, which in turn improves their experience because we can make better recommendations to them. So, a lot of it is about separating the emotion from the reality and doing everything we can to kind of help prepare people.
Yeah. Nice, nice. So,
get that sad baby off the screen.
Let's get that. So, here's the fun part. Why we showed you the video to start off with is, with apologies to James Lipton and inside the Actors Studio, this is going to be the MX questionnaire.
Oh,
so,
God.
He asked, what is your favorite word? I'm going to ask, what is your favorite acronym or buzzword?
Oh, okay. TPM.
TPM.
Tweets per minute. This was something that somebody within YouTube came up with because we started doing this thing where we made it very easy to share and auto-share your ratings and favorites through Twitter, and so, yeah,
nice.
Tweets per minute.
What is your least favorite acronym or buzzword?
Pretty much all of them.
Okay. That's kind of indiscriminate. I like it. What turns you on creatively?
Really talented people who are really nice.
What turns you off creatively?
Talented people who think that their talent gives them an excuse to be a jerk, because it doesn't.
What sound or noise, instead of what sound or noise do you love, what little interaction design do you love?
I love, in a lot of the new smartphone experiences, some of the animations that are working their way into the experience, whether it's on Nexus or iPhone, and feeling that the tactile feeling, it's very satisfying. Yeah. So I love that.
What interaction design annoys you?
Oh gosh, such a great pool to draw from. I would say, I can't speak to the specific product, but there's an internal third-party product that we use at work that is so extraordinarily inefficient in remembering kind of actions I've taken in the past that every time I log in to use it, it makes me very angry. But I can't get specific.
Okay. What would your coworkers say is your favorite curse word?
God, again, so many to draw from. I found, and I don't know if this is the YouTube effect, I've actually become more profane at work over the past year. I think that's probably true. I will tell you, I don't know how much I've used this at work, but in general, one of my favorite ones is "oh la vache," which is a French expression that literally means "oh the cow." In reality, it's translated to like "oh my goodness," which isn't really a swear word, but it's just so great.
Yeah, sounds good in French. Say that again.
"Oh la vache."
Oh la vache. And if a special heaven existed for UX managers, what would you like to hear St. Peter say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I guess, not to sound too trite, but that you helped create environments where people could improve the lives of others through design.
Nice.
Huh.
Great ending.